Of all the anime I expected to leave feeling a renewed sense of pride and faith in human achievement and progress, Dr. Stone actually seemed like one of them, now that I think about it, though it definitely caught me off guard when I realised. Premiering in July 2018, Dr. Stone was one of the year's big new debuts, and from the start I was a relatively casual viewer. Here we have another big shonen anime with an admittedly interesting premise and story hook, with a cast of absurd, somewhat simple but still very enjoyable characters. That's what I thought as I watched the first few episodes, that this would be a pretty entertaining, perhaps even educational show, but ultimately one that wouldn't leave much of an impact on me. In hindsight though, looking at the premise and protagonist, perhaps I should have expected something from the get-go. For those not in the know, Dr. Stone takes place over 5,000 years after a cataclysmic event that saw all of humanity petrified by a mysterious green light, eventually losing all thought process as nature reclaims the world around them. The only two able to keep their consciousness intact, that we know of, being Senku and his best friend, Taiju, the latter using his regret over never confessing his feelings to focus and power through, and Senku literally counting every second that passes for 3,715 years and 241 days until he finally breaks out. In case you couldn't tell, Senku is basically a walking, talking, mildly maniacal personification of Wikipedia, and Dr. Stone is just full of insane, ridiculous characters like that. I'm not even going to try and talk about the 18-year-old who beats a lion to death in episode 2. Watching these early episodes, I felt that the show wouldn't really grow too far beyond this general tone and feeling. I thought it would stay this over-the-top edutainment show that, while it had a neat gimmick, it wouldn't really stick out too much. So I kept watching, enjoying this absurd story and maybe learning a few new things about hard science along the way. But then Chrome happened, and that's when my view of the show started to shift a little bit. Chrome is a young man born into the stone world millennia after the mass petrification. Virtually all knowledge of modern media, technology, and scientific understanding was never passed down to him. He grew up living in an isolated tribe, heavily dictated by tradition, where any potential outsiders were to be treated with suspicion and denied entry to the village. And yet, despite all that, Chrome is still a scientist. Granted, it takes him a little while to realize that, but despite not having access to the same foundation as his ancestors, he shares their same innate curiosity, the drive to not just understand the world, but take joy in that understanding. When Chrome realizes the enormity of what's been lost, the progress that's been undone, he weeps, mourning the wonders he was never able to see. And that's when I started to understand what Dr. Stone is, that it wasn't just a ridiculous school lesson starring a uniquely overpowered broccoli, or at least it wasn't just that. It's a celebration of the scientific method and human ingenuity, even in the face of encroaching darkness. It says that science isn't just a cold, inhuman tool to accomplish tasks, but instead a wondrous thing through which we can truly understand, appreciate, and enjoy life's idiosyncrasies. Indeed, Dr. Stone relishes in the slow, steady, uneven march of scientific progress. 5 episodes are spent slowly inching along the roadmap to making antibiotics, and each tiny step feels like a monumental milestone. The initial goal of saving Ruri sort of just fades into the background. By the time the drug was actually finished, I had almost forgotten why we were making it in the first place, and I'll admit, a little disappointed that it was all over. But every success, every win, is just the stepping stone to something much greater. Progress lays the ground for progress, which lays the ground for ever more progress. From antibiotics to telecommunications, all the way to space travel. Senku's dream, above all dreams, one him and I share. And that leads into one of the greatest lessons Dr. Stone taught me, that science, while fascinating in its own right, is also, in a sense, meaningless by itself. Not that there isn't anything fun about abstract numbers and chemical compositions, but to me at least, science's true worth is made apparent when it is applied to the world around us. Say I go to a far-off country, exploring the local landscapes, in awe of their majesty. Science helps me learn more about these environments, how they came to be, how they differ compared to everywhere else. I'm fascinated by animals. Science helps me understand how they behave, their life cycles, how they evolved. I look at the stars and the nebulae that birthed them, the galaxies that house them. Science gives me a way to understand all that, to know if it exists in the first place, and to maybe, one day, see it up close for myself. It's through science that we understand the world around us, that we create our own worlds, that we journey to others. Of course, things can still be appreciated at a surface level. You don't need to understand how salt flats are made to know that they look fucking beautiful, but knowing that, knowing the story behind it, for me at least, and maybe for a few of you watching, that knowledge only enhances that sense of wonderment. Humanity has done some, let's face it, pretty awful things, especially in the last several thousand years. Sometimes it might feel like, for every good thing we've done, there are at least 1,000 other instances that more than counter it. In fact, I'd say it's easy to feel like that. But Dr. Stone reminds me that yes, we have accomplished some insane things, things we have every right to be proud of. Think of how far civilization has come in just a few thousand years, how our ancestors would likely have their minds blown, hell, how our grandparents probably have their minds blown, how we'll have our minds blown in the future. When you think about that, it's hard not to just be in awe of this, of our existence, of the world around us. It's big, it's scary, and it's beautiful. A fact that grows more and more evident with each day that passes, with every scrape and crawl forward. For worse, and for better, we continue with our never-ending ascertaining of life, and I'll be there every step of the way.